Welcome to another season preview. This time, Darren and I will be looking at Port Adelaide, another very interesting side. Daz, Port Adelaide, what did you think of their season last year?
Yeah, lost their first five, which killed them. Then they made a bit of a run after that. They were in the mix for finals late in the year. They went 10-7 after that first five. But given they'd made back-to-back prelims, they were talking premierships at the start of the year, so 0-5 put them right out of business. But credit to them, they did recover and looked to be going again pretty well by the end of the season.
We said this about a couple of other clubs, but they've actually got some pretty solid list departures. Robbie Gray, who's an absolute champion player, Stephen Motlop the same. Carl Amon's gone over to Hawthorn. He was arguably the best winger in the competition last year. But then in comes Jason Horne-Francis, much maligned in his first season at North Melbourne. And then Junior Rioli also, there was some controversy there, him coming over to Port Adelaide. Look, out of those players and the rest of the club, who are you thinking is going to have a breakout season at Port Adelaide?
It's fair to say with the two incoming in Horne-Francis and Rioli that both of the clubs that they left weren't particularly happy with the departing player. But Robbie Gray, you can mount an argument. I know Treadray is probably the one we think of, but you can mount an argument he's their best ever player, Robbie Gray. He's been a phenomenal player for Port Adelaide, so they'll miss him for sure. I reckon Zach Butters, they had that draft crew a couple of years ago where they got Rosie, Dersma and Butters. We've seen Rosie burst into All-Australian calculations. Butters was pretty good, and I think he could follow in his footsteps. In the last month, he averaged 27 possessions and 2 goals. He might be the next one to break out, as Connor Rosie did for Port Adelaide. And they'll be hoping that Horne-Francis, he averaged 16 possessions a game in his first year at North, and obviously they were struggling a little bit, and it appears he wasn't all that comfortable or happy in that environment. So they'll be hoping that they can get a breakout from him.
Just on Rosie, he profiles as a player that had a really, really strong season, almost a breakout season last year, but he could potentially go up from that this year and then even put himself in Brownlow contention. I know that often happens. Players need a season to capture the attention of the umpires. Do you think that there could be a Brownlow chance, for Connor Rosie?
Potentially. A few scribes thought when he was drafted that he might have been the best player in that draft. Obviously, we've seen Sam Walsh and others obviously really kick on. So, yeah, I think definitely, because you've got Ollie Wines, who's won a Brownlow. He'll obviously attract votes. Travis Boak nearing the end of his career, but been a superstar. But yeah, Rosie you would think is at least their second best midfielder now.
Well, people tend to forget. I mean, there's no shortage of star power at Port Adelaide, but you've definitely got a smoky here, which I think is a good selection for best and fairest.
Well, midfielders generally win the Brownlow, but key position players do get a bit of attention in club awards, and Todd Marshall's pretty important for Port Adelaide. He kicked 45 goals last year. They had Dixon either unavailable for a lot of the season or a little bit down on form when he was playing late. So if you look at it, Marshall kicked 3 or more goals 7 times last year. Port Adelaide won 5 of those matches. He finished 6th in the best and fairest. And if he gets a little bit better, then he becomes a 50-plus forward and puts himself into that category of key position players that have won best and fairest, like Tom Lynch at Richmond, those sorts of players. So yeah, I think he's crucial to how good they can be, and that'll be translated into the best and fairest voting.
Well, I did always think that Mitch Georgiadis would overtake Todd Marshall to be that number 1 key forward at Port Adelaide, but he just struggled last year for a few reasons. I think fitness injuries were one of them, but Port Adelaide as a whole, how do you think they're going to go in 2023?
Fascinating looking at the numbers last year. So as much as we say they finished the year well, concerning for them, they were 2-9 against teams in the top 8, and they were 3-7 in games played away from the Adelaide Oval. So they didn't travel particularly well, and they didn't have a great record against the top sides. They beat Sydney and the Bulldogs at home. They were the 2 wins they had against top 8 sides. However, they had the 5th best percentage in the AFL, and percentage is often a guide of how good teams actually are. So they've just got to probably shake clear of whether they were beating up on bottom sides and struggling against the top sides. Can they improve based on their list profile? That's probably the only concern I would have. And looking at the top 8 markets, given I think there are probably 6 teams that are locks to make the 8, Geelong, Melbourne, Carlton, Brisbane, Sydney, Richmond. I think you've got the likes of the Bulldogs, Fremantle, Port Adelaide, maybe an improving Gold Coast, maybe St Kilda, sort of in that mix. If you look at Fremantle, Bulldogs, Port are $1.60 to make the 8. Fremantle are $1.90. Bulldogs are $1.80. I would mount an argument that Port Adelaide aren't better than the Bulldogs and Fremantle, so I'd be contemplating laying them for the 8.
That's an interesting betting strategy. So lay Port Adelaide to make the top 8. Interestingly enough, some of the possibilities on the exchange are you can place a lay bet and then trade into a back bet position. Is there a price that you think Port Adelaide could potentially get to where you would consider placing a back bet?
Yeah, that'll be fascinating because if they start the season poorly again, there's all that speculation around their coach and their future. So would they recover? I'm not sure, but that would certainly be an option because we have seen that they can get on a roll. So if they were 2 and 3, 2 and 4 and went beyond $2.50 for the 8, something like that, then you could look at it and think if they have a string of home games, then maybe they're back on.
Well, there it is. Lots of possibilities for the Port Adelaide Power. That's all we've got time for this season preview of Port, but we'll be back soon. Check out all the other season previews on the Betfair Hub.
Gamble responsibly. Call 1-800-858-858.